Welcome to Law You Should Know. The law affects every aspect of our lives, our home, our jobs, and our recreational activities. Now you can learn about the law and how to protect yourself against the loss of your liberty or property. Learn how to stand up for your rights and seek compensation when you have been wronged. Your host for Law You Should Know is attorney Kenneth J. Landau with the Mineola Law Firm of Shane, Dox, Denisi, and Corker. He's a member of the Committee on Professional Ethics of the Bar Association of Nassau County and counsel to the Nassau Academy of Law. And now, here is your host for Law You Should Know, attorney Kenneth J. Landau.
Hi, this is Ken Landau, and welcome to Law You Should Know. Today we're talking with Barry Seidel, and he is the ultimate solo practitioner, and he's based in Queens County and is a very involved attorney in the courts there. And he's also the author of a new book, Evolutions of a Law Practice. And we're going to share some of his experiences and insights with the public and the bars out there. Barry, congratulations on the publication of your book. You've been practicing as a solo practitioner more or less for over 35 years, primarily in Queens County, and you've built up quite a practice there. What made you decide to be, and a solo practice means a person practicing on their own or in a very small group. What made you decide at the outset to become a solo practitioner?
Well, you know what they say, Ken, sometimes necessity is the mother of invention. And when I was in school, I was considering following a standard path, like many law students do. I wanted to get a job. Didn't really think in too much detail about what that would entail. But when I was running into some difficulties in securing a job right out of school, and this was back in 1981, 1982, and sometimes people nowadays think that this is the only time in history when it was kind of a tough job market for new lawyers, but I can assure you these things run in cycles, and when I was coming out of school, it wasn't a great cycle. But fortunately, I had the good foresight to have been working part-time while I was in school, which, by the way, I think is a very important thing for law students to do. So I had some exposure to small firm practice. I got some pretty good experience. And at a certain point, the idea was gnawing at me, well, maybe I know enough to open my own practice. And I thought about ways of doing that, and I found a way to do it.
And you have found some very unique ways to successfully run a solo practice. So tell about some of the secrets of your success.
Well, one thing that I always did was I just paid attention to opportunities in the market that I could serve, and I always just kept my mind open for new and different ways to market them. So just to give you one example, back in the early 80s, lawyer marketing or lawyer advertising had just become legal. People now sometimes don't remember that up until that time, the late 70s, early 80s, lawyers weren't even permitted to advertise. At that time, when I was coming out into practice, it had been around for a couple of years, and I had an idea to advertise for landlord-tenant cases as a landlord or tenant lawyer in the Yellow Pages in New York County. Placed an ad. It cost me all of $12 per month to run the ad. I figured that while there was Manhattan, at that time I was in Manhattan when I started, I thought that there'd be competition, but I also knew I'd be available to answer the phone. And when the book came out, I was shocked. In Manhattan, only 5 lawyers listed for landlord-tenant. $12 a month, I got calls every day.
And so that's one of the secrets, is don't go into a very crowded or overcrowded field or niche of law.
It's always, I think, better to find niches that are in demand, but where you can come in and make a difference. There are lots of areas where there's lots of competition, but there's also a lot of demand and need. It always is useful to differentiate yourself in some way, though. I do agree with that.
And over the years, you found a very unique way to differentiate yourself to lawyers. And tell us about how you built up that business to make you the king of Queens.
Yes, thank you, Ken. At a certain point, I was doing plaintiff personal injury cases as a primary area of my practice. And I noticed a big problem in doing that work was when I had cases in other counties outside Queens, where most of my cases, but certainly not all of my cases, when I had to appear in Manhattan or Brooklyn or the Bronx, it was quite inconvenient to go there for one case. Between the traveling and not really knowing how those courts functioned and not knowing all the players, I saw that, boy, I would have been willing to pay somebody to go and cover those cases for me. And more than that, I noticed that of all the counties, Queens County, where I had a lot of cases, was a particularly difficult county for lawyers in other places to come to. Lots of reasons for that, between the parking and traveling and just it being a place where they weren't familiar with. And so I had the idea to start offering court coverage service to other lawyers who needed coverage in the Queens County Courthouse.
And you would save them the trip and the aggravation. So they wouldn't have to travel from Manhattan or from Riverhead or from White Plains or other places to go to Queens. You were there already. You knew the judges, you knew the rules, you knew all the people involved.
Yes, and if I was handling a volume of cases, which before too long, after doing some marketing for it, before too long I had a volume of cases that I was covering there for other lawyers, I wouldn't really mind too much if I had to wait around for my adversary for an hour or 2 hours or for the court to be available for the conference, because I was doing other conferences in other courtrooms. On the other hand, if an attorney had traveled from Long Island or from Brooklyn to come to Queens and they traveled an hour each way and they paid to park, gosh, they're pretty unhappy when they're standing around waiting for an hour.
So you may have saved them 5 hours of work, but you're only charging them for the half hour on their case. So it's a win-win situation for both of you.
Yes, and there's no uncertainty to it. I charged them a flat rate. When I started, I was charging $75 or $100 for most appearances. It really hasn't changed all that much. And so it's well worth it for some lawyer who wants to hire an attorney to cover some part of the case for him rather than spending 4 or 5 hours of their time that's worth a few $100s an hour. And they pay me or somebody that does what I do $100 to get the thing done. I get it done. It's a business.
And you actually know better than perhaps they do, what's going to happen and what the magic words are and what needs to be taken care of at that conference or proceeding.
Well, there's a great variation in the types of appearances that we have. I mean, most of the appearances are somewhat ministerial, although not totally. You've got to know what the case is about and what's permitted and what you can ask for. I've been shocked over the years sometimes when attorneys have sent me as a per diem lawyer, and that's what we call it. It's kind of per the appearance. I've been shocked sometimes at the complexity of cases that people have sent me on rather than coming themselves, but we do them, whether they're easy or hard, we do them.
And you've also often been imitated in Queens and other counties because of the success of your idea.
Well, it's a funny thing. When I started doing it, there weren't too many lawyers that were doing it. There were a few insurance company lawyers that did that kind of work, appearances for their colleagues. They were doing it sort of moonlighting. When I started doing it, I marketed it to a bunch of the plaintiffs' personal injury attorneys who I thought would be my best customers. I did a direct mail campaign to them using a list that I compiled myself of people who had just basically filed their cases. I wrote to them and told them about the service, and they started using me. Not too long after that, I'd say about 6 months or a year after I was doing it, I had the good fortune of having the New York Law Journal find out about what I was doing. A reporter came and did a story about it, and not only was I on the front page of the Law Journal, but the next thing I knew, lawyers were doing per diem all over New York. It became kind of a big thing, and now it's fairly well entrenched in New York practice.
And for the same reasons you mentioned, saving time, providing value.
Well, yes, that's a lot of businesses are based on that, and law, like many other things, is a business. So I saw a problem that I had that I realized that other lawyers had, and I basically solve a problem for lawyers, and there's many businesses are based on solving someone else's problem.
Okay. Probably everything in life is based on solving a problem, and you found out a system that works. And that led you to evolve your practice away from worrying about handling cases to just dealing with cases on a limited basis. Let the lawyer worry about the big picture, and you just would worry about carrying your assignment out for that day?
Well, yes, I actually called my book Evolutions of a Law Practice for a particular reason, which is after having started my practice right out of law school, I evolved through various different areas of practice. So when I started out, I was kind of a generalist. I pretty much took everything and anything, as many people starting out are tempted to do. I then realized it made a little more sense to focus, so I learned how to do landlord-tenant, did that for a while, liked it, but didn't want to make a career out of it, evolved into doing real estate because it was a natural evolution from landlord-tenant. I liked it, but again, not enough to keep doing it. Plus, I wanted to make some more money. Evolved next into an area that I chose to go into. In hindsight, I regretted it in certain ways. I went into the plaintiff's personal injury field. I made a little more money doing that, which is the reason I went into it, but not enough to make up for some of the things about that area of law that I didn't like. And while I was doing it, I discovered the per diem area, so evolved into that, and then had a little life-changing event while that was all going on.
And since you discuss it in your book, and other people have challenges and while they're practicing law and in life, just if you want to for a moment or two tell us about how the stress of practicing law caused you a challenge and how you came back from that.
Well, I'll tell it to you in a nutshell, and I'm not shy about talking about this. At a certain point, the working in the personal injury field led me to discover or to look at and start doing this per diem work. And I made a big hit with the per diem work right away. It made me very happy. I was doing better. I got some recognition. I was enjoying it. It was exciting. But at the same time, I had 150 negligence cases in my office that not only did I not like them, I didn't feel like working on them anymore. I wanted to do the per diem work. The stuff was getting harder and harder, and I realized deep down that work wasn't for me. I went into it strictly for money. And I'd say to anyone listening, money alone is not a reason to go into an area of law or an endeavor of any kind. And it became so stressful that at the age of 43, while I was in court one day, thinking about my negligence cases, while I was running around doing the per diem and worrying and stressing, at age 43, I had a heart attack. I didn't work for a year. And
you were literally on the stairs, because in Queens you had to run around, because especially at that time, the elevators didn't work.
Yes, that's true. I walked up from the first floor to the second floor, felt a little lightheaded, went over to the bench, and had a heart attack. It's the truth.
Wow. And what did you do to move on from that point?
Well, I had a good amount of time to think about what I wanted to do, and I didn't work for 6 months at all, part-time for another 6 months after that. And so I spent my time when I was able to work a little. I wound down my negligence practice, which was sort of gratifying in a way. I looked at the per diem work and realized at that time I couldn't really run around in court, but I could hire other people to do it for me and subcontract the work and concentrate on marketing and back office, and did that. And after doing that for a while and kind of seeing that worked enough, I went into it or evolved into a new area of law and learned how to do something. 15, 20 years into my career, I learned how to do probate and estate work and still do it, and found that I really, really liked it. And I took it on really later in my career.
But you became an expert on it, and literally it doesn't involve as much running around.
That is true, but it is challenging, and it has its stressful moments. But of course, part of the experience of going through having a heart attack and realized why it had happened to me was part of getting better was learning how to cope with stress and stressful situations better. And I don't know that anyone ever masters it, but I would like to think that I got a lot better at it.
And that's a big issue for the legal profession as a whole. And Barry discusses these areas about his challenges and his road to recovery in his book. I just want to remind our listeners, you're listening to 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nassau Community College, and also on the internet at nccradio.org. In some ways, does anger contribute to stress among lawyers?
I would say that while it may not be so for everybody, and I think it is true for a lot of people, that underlying issues of anger probably one of the leading causes of stress, because when a person is stressed, they're not handling or reacting to situations presented to them in a healthy way. I think it's a big mistake for people to think that when something frustrating or challenging is happening, that if you have a rant or an outburst, that somehow releases the tension and makes it better. This is a construct that people can put on things that's very unhealthy and very dangerous. Because in reality, getting angry about any situation never solves the problem. There are much more productive ways to solve the problem. And I do talk about this in the book. A big part of my recovery from the heart attack, while the physical part was important, way more important was the anger management, mental health aspect of it, learning how to respond to stressful situations better. And a good part of that is recognizing anger when it happens, disrupting that sort of thought flow. And oftentimes it's as simple as stepping back and realizing that you're in a stressful situation. Instead of taking the default of reacting in an angry way, to step back, see it for what it is, and then ask yourself the very empowering question, what do I want? When a person asks themselves, what do I want? Even if the answer doesn't come to you immediately, you've interrupted the anger flow and you've thought about a solution to the problem. Anger almost never solves a problem, but good thought patterns do come up with solutions.
So it's always good for people to change the way they think.
If they change it in a productive way, that's helpful.
In a productive way.
Yes.
Now, you mentioned some ideas you had about marketing a long time ago. To fast forward to the present, how do you find the Internet works for lawyers?
I think the Internet works tremendously well for lawyers if you understand how it works and how to use it. Basically, any potential client that you have, when they're presented with a problem that might lead them to call a lawyer, is going to do the logical thing. They're going to do a Google search, and every lawyer's challenge if they want their best clients to find them. And I'll step aside for a second here and say that before a lawyer can figure out how to market on the Internet, it makes a lot of sense to figure out who your ideal client is and what kind of calls and cases and clients you want to get. What I like to do and what I like to counsel other lawyers to do if they're thinking about marketing on the Internet in any way is put yourself in the position of your ideal client who's looking for a lawyer. Think about what sort of Google searches they would do, and then do the searches. See who comes up. See who your competitors are. See what they're saying or not saying that's interesting to you, and design anything that you do on the Internet to be making sure that you show up when your best client does a logical Google search.
And how would you show up on top of those people when your future client makes that search?
Well, the best way is to have content out there that Google will pick up as valuable content. And it's not just Google, it's any other search engines. So the way to make yourself known and the way to show up when people are doing good searches is to be productive. Sad to say that while one can pay to be a sponsor, to be a sponsored ad on Google, and it costs money to do that. Not everybody is in a position to do it, but there are ways to do it without spending huge money. And the way to do it is to create content in the form of blogs, social media, and getting noticed in places or written about. But the main thing is to give of yourself by putting out useful information. A lot of lawyers make the mistake when they're putting together their own website, for example, of being a little stingy with the information. You kind of put a little basic stuff and then say, for more information, call me. I never took that approach, and I've had many, many websites over the years and gotten hundreds, maybe thousands of clients through them. The main thing that clients tell me they like and why they called me is that I gave them useful information. Nobody's going to take your information and go do it themselves. And if they do, they're probably not a great client anyway. You put the information out there so that when people are doing a search, they come to your information as they've read what you've put out there and see your personality and how you come through and how giving you are, by the time they're calling or emailing you, they're already predisposed to retain you because they know that you know your stuff and they know that you're willing to help them.
Is it sometimes best going after small, specific search terms rather than larger ones? For instance, in your book, you talk about public administrator, so that would be a less common search term than will or will and estates.
Yes, that's a good example, Ken, and the reason why I talked about that and why I think that is a useful type of approach is if your clients are going to be involved in a certain kind of case, they're going to search based on the things that they're involved in. Now, public administrator is an official that's involved in a lot of estate cases. I saw that a lot of my best cases would be cases where the public administrator was on the other side of it or was involved in it. And I knew that clients getting served with papers for court from the public administrator might not know what that is. And so I wrote articles. Yeah. Yes, I wrote articles explaining what the public administrator does. I'd even say in other areas, there's so much competition, for example, in the personal injury and the negligence field, nobody's going to get noticed talking about accident cases or car accidents because a lot of people talk about that. I've consulted with and counseled people that do personal injury work to talk about some specific narrower type of case so that you're coming across with some level of expertise and a client might searching for that. For example, motorcycle accidents, a little subcategory. If you're writing an article about motorcycle accidents or you're talking about that on your blog and you can get that to come up higher on a search, you've done yourself and the clients a service.
And you've been an excellent marketer yourself, and you've also run your own groups to counsel marketing. Aside from blogs, you run seminars and programs. Tell us about some of those that lawyers out there can attend or learn more about.
Well, I've always been involved in setting up lawyer networking. I had started an organization called the New York Lawyers Network many, many years ago. But most of the marketing and networking that I do now is more on an informal basis. I'm active in the Queens Bar Association, but I also go to all nature of bar association events and conferences. I've gone to the Clio conference a couple of times. Clio is a law practice management software that I use personally, but I also liked going and I've always enjoyed going to their conferences because when you go to these conferences, you meet interesting, intriguing people doing things that are different than what you do, and that just present great networking opportunities, and always tried to foster those sort of things.
We just have a few minutes left in the show. I'd just like to remind our listeners you're listening to attorney Barry Seidel talk about his new book, Evolutions of a Law Practice. It's available on Amazon.
Yes, it is. And
you're listening to 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nassau Community College, and you can also hear our programs at nccradio.org. One point you make in your book is that character counts for lawyers. Why is that so important?
Character counts because whether you're dealing with clients or the courts or with adversaries, it's something that doesn't cost you anything to exhibit, but will cost you greatly if people perceive you as not being a person of high character. So as a lawyer, your reputation, both on your abilities and on your character, I don't even know any other way to say it. You're a person who's going to do things right and do things ethically. People gravitate towards that, and there's no substitute for it, and there's no getting it back once somebody doesn't see that in you.
And they'll continue to deal with you.
Well, that's right. They'll continue to deal with you, and they'll also recommend you. The highest recommendation somebody can give about you is, this is somebody you can trust. And nothing feels better than a person saying that about you.
What do you think are some of the best areas for attorneys today to go into in New York or maybe in a different market?
Well, I would say as a start, people should go, as attorneys, should go into areas that they themselves are interested in. Any area you go in, there will always be room for more people who are good at it and enthusiastic. Now, when I look at where things are today, just as my practice evolved, practice in general has evolved, and areas come in and out of favor. A few of the areas that I see for small firms and solos that are surely growth areas for the future, elder law and issues concerning elderly clients is definitely a big one. This is just based on demographics alone. Baby boomers are now becoming older folks, and people who are older folks with people living longer, even older folks have older parents. And so elder law and all those issues are surely a growth area. Another one very much in the news that I think if I were a young attorney, I would be going into this field is immigration law. There is such a need for this and such a demand. And I'll point something else out also, Ken. Just as there are people who need immigration lawyers, and just as with any area of law, there's always the other side of it. So there's plenty of opportunities for lawyers to work for the government or in administrative law on the immigration side, and it's kind of true in any area. Other areas that I like also for the future, even though there wouldn't be something that I would know about myself, but anything in the IT and tech area, particularly things having to do with international, just because this is a growth area and it's an area that not everybody can know how to do it, but people who do know how to do these things will be in demand. And with like with anything else, if you're interested in it, you can learn it.
We just have a few seconds left, and most important, what is your website, Barry, and how can you be reached if someone wants to contact you?
The website for the book is www.evolutionsofelawpractice.com. I also have a couple of other websites, one for my court appearance per diem business, which is www.wecoverqueens.com. And I have another one for my probate work, which is www.queensprobate.com.
Okay. So I just want to congratulate you on a long and prosperous and still growing legal career. And my guest has been Barry Seidel, who's written the book Evolutions of a Law Practice. It has a lot more detail on some of the subjects we talked about. Very good advice for everyone as they pursue their career, and it's a very good gift if you know someone who's professional or a lawyer, new or old, or a law student out there. And it's available through Amazon. You're listening to Law You Should Know on 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nest Community College, and also this program's available as a podcast, as are many past shows, at nccradio.org. Please join us next week at this same time for another program on Law You Should Know.